An altimeter is an instrument used to measure the altitude or height above a reference point, typically the Earth's surface. It is commonly used in aviation, mountaineering, and other activities where knowing the altitude is important. The altimeter works based on the principle of atmospheric pressure. It measures the pressure exerted by the atmosphere and converts it into an altitude reading. As altitude increases, atmospheric pressure decreases. The altimeter consists of an aneroid barometer, which is a sealed chamber containing a partially evacuated capsule or set of capsules that expand or contract in response to changes in atmospheric pressure. When the altimeter is set to a known reference point, such as sea level pressure, it can provide an accurate reading of the altitude above that reference point. The reference point is typically obtained from weather reports or aviation charts that provide the current sea level pressure at a given location. In aviation, altimeters are essential instruments for pilots, as they provide important information about the aircraft's vertical position relative to the ground and other obstacles. They are typically found on the aircraft's instrument panel and display altitude in feet or meters. Modern altimeters used in aviation often incorporate additional features, such as the ability to set the altimeter to a specific pressure setting, QNH or QNE, to account for variations in atmospheric pressure at different locations. They may also have built-in barometric corrections to compensate for temperature changes that can affect pressure readings. In summary, an altimeter is an instrument that measures altitude by utilizing atmospheric pressure and is used in various activities to determine height above a reference point. QNH is a term used in aviation to refer to a specific pressure setting on an altimeter. It stands for altimeter setting at sea level pressure and is a means of adjusting the altimeter reading to reflect the current atmospheric pressure at sea level. The atmospheric pressure varies with weather conditions and altitude. Pilots need to have a common reference point for altitude measurements, and that reference point is typically sea level pressure. By setting the altimeter to the current sea level pressure, the altimeter will indicate the correct altitude above sea level. QNH is obtained from meteorological reports or air traffic control. It is expressed in units of pressure, such as inches of mercury, (nhg), or hectopascals, (HPa). Pilots set the QNH value on their altimeters to ensure accurate altitude indications during their flight. When a pilot sets the altimeter to QNH, the altimeter will read 0 at the airport elevation or field elevation where the QNH was obtained. As the aircraft climbs or descends, the altimeter will display the accurate altitude relative to sea level, allowing the pilot to maintain proper vertical separation from other aircraft and obstacles. It's worth mentioning that QNH is just one of the pressure settings pilots use on their altimeters. There are other settings like QNE, standard pressure setting of 29.92 nhg or 1013.25 HPa, and QFE, pressure at a specific airfield's elevation, that serve different purposes depending on the situation and flight requirements. QNE is another term used in aviation to refer to a specific pressure setting on an altimeter. It stands for altimeter setting at standard pressure or altimeter setting at 29.92 inches of mercury, (nhg). QNE is a standardized pressure setting used in certain flight conditions, such as when operating in cruise flight at higher altitudes. It provides a common reference for altitude measurements, regardless of the actual atmospheric pressure at a specific location. In aviation, the International Standard Atmosphere, ISA, defines standard atmospheric conditions at various altitudes. At sea level, the standard atmospheric pressure is 29.92 nhg or 1013.25 hectopascals, (HPa). QNE is set to this value, indicating that the altimeter is adjusted to show altitude relative to the standard pressure. By setting the altimeter to QNE, pilots can compare their altitude with other aircraft, follow standardized procedures, and maintain proper vertical separation during cruise flight. It allows for consistent altitude reporting and ensures uniformity in the aviation system. However, it's important to note that QNE is not typically used for takeoff, landing, or flight operations at lower altitudes where the local atmospheric pressure is significant. In those cases, pilots would use QNH or QFE settings, which provide a more accurate indication of altitude relative to the local pressure at a specific airport or location. In summary, QNE is the pressure setting on an altimeter that corresponds to the standard atmospheric pressure of 29.92 nhg or 1013.25 HPa. It is used in cruise flight at higher altitudes to provide a common reference for altitude measurements, ensuring consistent altitude reporting and vertical separation between aircraft. QFE is another term used in aviation to refer to a specific pressure setting on an altimeter. It stands for altimeter setting at field elevation or altimeter setting at the elevation of a specific airfield. Unlike QNH and QNE, which provide altitude readings relative to sea level or standard pressure, QFE provides altitude readings relative to the actual elevation of a specific airfield. It is primarily used for operations in the vicinity of an airfield, particularly during takeoff and landing. When a pilot sets the altimeter to QFE, the altimeter will indicate the aircraft's height above the airfield's elevation. This is useful for maintaining clearance above the terrain and obstacles in the immediate vicinity of the airfield during critical phases of flight. QFE is typically provided by air traffic control or published in the form of an airfield's weather report or chart. It is expressed in units of pressure, such as inches of mercury, nhg, or hectopascals, HPa. It's important to note that QFE is a local setting and will vary from one airfield to another. Therefore, as an aircraft departs from the airfield, the altimeter reading will no longer accurately reflect the aircraft's altitude above sea level. At that point, pilots will switch to using QNH or QNE to obtain accurate altitude indications relative to sea level or standard pressure. In summary, QFE is the altimeter setting that provides altitude readings relative to the elevation of a specific airfield. It is primarily used for operations in the vicinity of an airfield, particularly during takeoff and landing, to ensure proper clearance above the terrain and obstacles in that area.